Okay, so let's now focus on more of solving using the quadratic formula. So whether or not it can be factored or done in some other way, we're going to solve using the quadratic formula on all of these. Okay, so the first thing you want to make sure of is that your equation is in descending order equal to 0, which it is. Okay, so the quadratic formula says your solutions, in this case, it would be what C equals. I won't use that. I'll just write the formula. So the formula says negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the c that you see in this equation is not the c that you see in the formula. Remember, the formula goes with the equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the a, the b, and the c that you use in the quadratic formula are talking about these. All right, now be sure you're not just using a program to get the answers. Make sure you know the process, because I'll expect you to show me the process for solving this, or you're not going to get full credit. Okay, so A, identify the A, the B, and the C. A is 3, B is -2, and C is -2. The C in the quadratic formula is -2. Now the formula says that your answers are going to be the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of the B value squared minus 4 times A times C, all of that over 2 times A. So B was -2, so it goes there. The B gets squared, minus 4 times the A value, which is 3, the C value, which is -2, all divided by 2 times the A value, which is 3. Now, I know this is going to seem weird. This is a different C. I'm going to put a line underneath it. The C that I'm talking about is the C that's right here. We're finding the solutions to that equation. Okay, so this turns out to be 4. This turns out to be 6. Oh, and that C that's up here in this equation, I mean, they could have used a D or a G or an X or a L. It's just some letter that you're trying to get the value of. All right, so we'd have 4 plus or minus the square root of, and then -2 is in parentheses being squared, so that's +4. And then see the negative that's part of the formula and the negative on the 2 for C means you'll ultimately have plus right here, 4 times 3 times 2, which is 24. And that's all over 6. So that's 4 plus or minus the square root of 28 all over 6. And I don't want a decimal for this. We want the answers in exact form, which is simplest radical form. If you do the decimal for it, you're typically, in a lot of cases, you'll be rounding off. So here's where you need to understand how to simplify things like this. This is the hard part for a lot of students. This goes back to chapter 8. Take your 28 and you think about how 28 is 4 times 7. Okay. And some of you like going all the way to the prime factorization. So you see, you stop either here or here, depending upon how you like to think about it. The square root of 4 would be 2, and then 7 would still be trapped underneath. So 2 square root of 7 is going to go right there where 28, square root of 28 was. And then once we do that, we have to decide whether this can be simplified further or not. And what you're doing is looking to see if there's a common factor. And notice that 2 is common on top, so we can factor out the 2 from the numerator, and we would have 2 plus or minus square root of 7. Remember how that 2 from outside would have been distributed to create 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 7. So the 2 is a factor of both 4 and 2 square root of 7. Notice that that 2 that you factored out can now be canceled, divided into the 6, leaving you with 3 in the denominator. Okay. Now, most people get to where they don't show this factoring out step. Let me erase those arrows there. That what they do instead is they just come in and notice that 2 goes into all 3 of these numbers, and just 2 goes into 4 twice, 2 goes into 2 once, and into 6 3 times. So your final answer would be, let me get myself just one more line here. Okay, so my final answer would be 2 plus or minus the square root of 7 all over 3. All right, now go back for a second, because again, most of the issues have to do with simplifying. So go back to when we had 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 7. No, 4 plus or minus square root of 28. Go back to here. Sorry. Go back to this step. The 4 plus or minus square root of 28 over 6. Notice we didn't just divide 2 into the 4 and the 6 at that point. See, that's premature. This fraction bar is underneath both terms, so you should not cancel divide 2 into 4 and 2 into 6. That wouldn't be correct. You wouldn't have gotten the same answer. You would have had a 2 square root of 7 still. So watch the order in which you do things. Work a lot on from this point down where you're just simplifying. A lot of points are missed because people don't simplify that correctly. Okay. All right. Now, number 5 is different from 4 in that it's not set up yet. We've got to identify the A, the B, and the C. So we need to subtract the 5z and subtract the 1 to get it all equal to 0. Then we can see that A is 1, B is -5, and C is -1. Now this time the variable is called z in the formula. So what we're finding are the values of z. So they would equal the opposite of b plus or minus square root of the b squared minus 4 times a times c. Now I noticed on the final you're not expected to have this memorized, but it sure does help if you have it memorized. Okay, so that would be the opposite of -5 because b goes there. Remember the -5 should be in parentheses getting squared. Minus 4 times your a is 1, your c is -1. All of that over 2 times your a value. So put a line there. So we wind up with 5 and 2 in the denominator, 5 at the front, 2 in the denominator. Under the radical, we have -5 times itself, which is positive 25, and a negative times a negative would be plus something. So that's plus 4. Let me shorten these a little bit. All right, so we get a 5 plus or minus a square root of 29 all over 2. This one's a little easier than the previous one because 29 is a prime number, so there's really nothing more you could do. So your answer is already simplified all the way. Okay. All right, now let's take a look at number 6. All right, so if I were trying to factor that, I would want to get a 0 on one side. If I have going to use the quadratic formula, I got to do the same thing. Now, normally when I'm factoring, I don't like that negative in front of the squared term right here. I also don't like it when I'm using the quadratic formula. I think it makes it harder when that a value is negative. So I would highly recommend that you come in and just change the signs because you have an equation, so you can multiply both sides by -1, which makes that y squared minus 2y plus 1 equals, and -1 times 0 is still 0. So you can change the sign, and that doesn't really affect the answers you get. Okay. All right, later when you look at this by graphing, that's because the answers turn out to be where it crosses an axis. And if you have a negative out in front, the parabola might open down. You can switch it so it has a positive out in front. It opens up, but it'll still pass through those same two things. So anyway, it's okay to multiply through by negative is the point I'm trying to make. Now that one, to me, would have been factorable, and that's what I would have done at that point, but we were asked to use the quadratic formula. So I want you to see what happens if you use the quadratic formula. So a is 1, b is -2, and c is 1. Okay. So if I plug into the quadratic formula, I'm finding the value of y. Opposite of b, the b is -2 gets squared, minus 4 times the a times the c. All of that over 2 times the a value. Okay. All right, this one turns out to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. Oh, minus 4 all over 2. 4 minus 4 is 0. So I get 2 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. That's 2 plus or minus 0 over 2. And 2 plus 0 is 2. 2 minus 0 is 2. You only get one answer on this one. You just get a 1 for your answer here. Okay, this was actually, when I graphed it, this would actually be a parabola that opens up sitting right there at 1, where the original, once I moved it over like that, would have been a parabola opening down, but still right there at 1. So it only had one solution, right? And that would have been factorable. Could have, if they had let me, taken the y squared minus 2y plus 1 and broken it into y, 1, 1, both minus. And that's why we wound up getting y equals 1. And that would actually be, if I was given the choice, I would have done that by factoring. Okay. All right, one other what if I want to do before I move on, I'll erase these before I do number 7, is what if we left it with a negative on the y squared term? Then a would be negative 1, b would be positive 2, and c would have been negative 1. So watch what happens. You'd have the opposite of b. The b would get squared, minus 4 times the a times the c, all of that over 2 times the a value. So you get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, and that's minus 4 still, right? Because that's 2 negatives would be positive times another negative over negative 2. So the difference would be that we'd get negative 2 plus or minus 0, which would be negative 2 over negative 2, which still equals positive 1. Okay? So you could have left it that way, but I do find sometimes when it's more complicated and this part doesn't become a 0, that people struggle a little bit with that negative in the denominator like that. So I just wanted you to be aware this is an option. And I'm showing you the way I normally would do it. But again, it doesn't mean it's the only way, but I think it's helpful, right? And then we'll do one more in this video. We'll do number 7, which, looking at it right now, there's a lot of pre-work to do before you can jump into the quadratic formula. Okay, so let me clear out some space and then we'll work number 7. Okay, all right. Jeepers, it's hard. Let me see if I can erase it. Let me get all that. There we go. Okay. All right, so with this one, I've got to do a lot of things. I need to get it in the right form. So I need to distribute. So that would be 2n squared plus 6n. Okay. Then I need to bring the 2n and negative 2n and the 5 over. I need a 0, don't I, on that right-hand side. So I'm going to add 2n and subtract 5. So I'm going to get 2n squared plus 8n minus 5 equals 0. Okay. Then I was told I had to use the quadratic formula, so I'm not even going to try to factor. A is 2, B is 8, C is negative 5. Okay. So the formula tells you what the value of the variable is. The n would equal the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So that's negative 8 plus or minus square root of 64 plus 20 times 2 is 40, all over 4. It's negative 8 plus or minus square root of 104 over 4. And at that point, we're ready to do that part where you have to simplify that radical. Okay, so don't try to cancel. Don't divide 4 into 8 at this point. This fraction bar means that 4 has to go into both things. And you can't divide 4 into 104 because the 104 is underneath the square root sign. So it's inappropriate to do that. So what you should do is take your 104, start breaking it down. So it's 2 times 52 That 52 is 2 times 26, and 26 is 2 times 13. So we have 2 times 2 times 2 times 13. Okay. See a perfect square right there? So if I were doing the square root of that number, if I was doing the square root of all of that, it'd be 2 on the outside and 2 times 13, or 26, on the inside. So this becomes 2 square root of 26, all divided by 4. And then notice that 2 is a factor here, here, and here. So we can cancel or divide through by 2 on the top and bottom, and 2 would go in there, leaving you -4. 2 divides in there, leaving you 1. 2 divides into 4 2 times. So that's going to equal -4 plus or minus 1 square root of 26 all over 2. And look, 26 is even, but you can't divide 2 into 26 because that's not 26. It's square root of 26. Okay, so there's nothing more you can do, and that would be your final answer. Okay, so you could write the two answers separately, one with a plus and one with a minus if they want you to do that. But since these are not like terms, it doesn't really help you to separate it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop that video. In that video, we were just looking at solving 4 quadratic equations using the quadratic formula.